On a chilly November evening in 1969, Sister Cathy Cesnik, a vibrant and dedicated teacher at Archbishop Keogh High School in Baltimore, vanished without a trace. It was a Friday, and like any other, she had finished her day at the school, where she was deeply admired by both her colleagues and students. Sister Cathy was not just another nun. She was known for her warmth, kindness, and unwavering commitment to her students, particularly those who were most vulnerable. Her passion for teaching was matched only by her determination to make a difference in the lives of the young women under her care. That evening, Sister Cathy left her apartment, which she shared with another nun, Sister Helen Russell Phillips, to run a few errands. She was seen heading to a local shopping center, and the plan was simple: pick up a gift and some pastries for the weekend. But when night fell and Sister Cathy didn't return, concern quickly turned to panic. Sister Phillips waited anxiously, but when midnight came and went with no sign of her friend, she knew something was terribly wrong. The following morning, Sister Phillips reported Cathy missing, and the news spread rapidly through the tight-knit community. The disappearance of a nun was not something that happened in Baltimore, a city already grappling with its share of crime and unrest, but this was different. Sister Cathy was beloved by her students, and the thought that she might be in danger was unthinkable. Local authorities launched an immediate search, scouring the area for any sign of the missing nun. Her car, a green Ford Maverick, was found later that evening parked illegally a block from her apartment. Inside, detectives discovered an eerie scene. The car was littered with leaves and dirt, and on the dashboard sat a loaf of bread and a box of pastries, the items Sister Cathy had purchased earlier. But there was no sign of struggle, and more importantly, no sign of Sister Cathy. As word of her disappearance spread, shockwaves rippled through the community. Students, parents, and faculty members at Archbishop Keogh High School were devastated. Sister Cathy was more than just a teacher. She was a beacon of hope and compassion, someone who had touched the lives of countless young women during a time when they needed it most. Her absence was palpable, and the fear that something sinister had happened began to take hold. In the days that followed, the search efforts intensified. Police, volunteers, and even her students combed the city and surrounding areas, hoping for a miracle. But as days turned into weeks, hope began to dwindle. The community, once filled with optimism, now grappled with the harsh reality that Sister Cathy might never come home. Her disappearance was not just a mystery, it was a tragedy that struck at the very heart of Baltimore. The city was no stranger to crime, but the idea that a beloved nun could simply vanish without a trace was something new, something terrifying. As the search for Sister Cathy continued, questions began to surface, questions that would soon reveal a darkness lurking beneath the surface, tied to secrets that some were willing to kill to keep hidden. The case would eventually lead to one of the most chilling and controversial investigations in Baltimore's history, raising suspicions about the very institutions meant to protect and serve the community. But on that fateful night in November 1969, all anyone knew was that Sister Cathy was gone, and the world felt a little colder without her. On the frigid morning of January 3rd, 1970, two hunters stumbled upon a grim scene that would haunt Baltimore for decades to come. They were exploring a secluded area of Lansdowne, a sparsely populated suburb on the outskirts of the city, when they noticed something unusual on the ground, partially obscured by the overgrowth and litter. As they drew closer, the horrifying realization dawned on them: there, lying in the dirt, was the lifeless body of Sister Cathy Cesnik. The scene was one of both tragedy and mystery. Sister Cathy's body was found in an open field, her clothing disheveled and her face partially covered by dirt and debris. The cold winter air had preserved her remains better than expected, but the sight was no less harrowing. She had been missing for nearly 2 months, and this discovery confirmed the worst fears of those who had held out hope for her safe return. The condition of the body suggested that Sister Cathy had suffered a violent end. Her skull bore the marks of blunt force trauma, likely inflicted by a heavy object. Despite the severity of the injuries, there were no immediate signs of sexual assault, though the state of decomposition made it difficult to determine conclusively. The absence of certain personal items, such as her purse and shoes, added to the growing mystery. Were these items taken as trophies, or had they simply been lost in the chaos of her abduction? Speculation ran rampant in the days following the discovery. The police quickly launched an investigation, but the leads were scarce. The secluded location where the body was found was a stark contrast to the bustling city streets where Sister Cathy had last been seen. How did she end up here, and why did it take so long to find her? These questions plagued the investigators and the community alike. Initial theories about her death ranged from a random act of violence to something far more sinister. Some speculated that Sister Cathy had been killed because she knew too much. Rumors were already swirling about her knowledge of the sexual abuse scandal involving Father Joseph Mascal at Archbishop Keogh High School. Others believed that her death might be unrelated to the school and instead linked to broader criminal activities in the area. But without concrete evidence, these remained just theories, feeding the fear and uncertainty that gripped Baltimore. As the investigation unfolded, the discovery of Sister Cathy's body became a catalyst for deeper inquiries into the dark secrets hidden within the walls of the church and the local community. It was no longer just a case of a missing nun. It was the beginning of a much larger, more complex story that would eventually expose a network of abuse, corruption, and cover up that had festered for years. The discovery of her body marked the end of one search, but it was only the beginning of a much longer, more painful journey for those seeking justice for Sister Cathy. The question of who was responsible for her death and why would remain unanswered for decades, leaving a wound in the community that would never fully heal. Sister Cathy Cesnik was more than just a teacher at Archbishop Keogh High School. She was a beacon of hope and compassion in an environment that, for many students, was marked by fear and intimidation. Arriving at the school in the mid-1960s, she quickly became known for her approachable demeanor and genuine concern for her students' well-being. Unlike some of her peers, Sister Cathy had a unique ability to connect with the young women she taught, offering them not just education but emotional and spiritual guidance during a tumultuous period in their lives. Her classroom was a safe haven where students felt heard and valued. Sister Cathy encouraged her pupils to think critically, express themselves freely, and seek justice in all aspects of their lives. It was in this context that she became a trusted confidante, especially for those students who were struggling with difficult or painful personal issues. Many students, both during her life and posthumously, have spoken of her kindness, her willingness to listen, and her dedication to helping them navigate the challenges they faced. However, there was a darker undercurrent at Archbishop Keogh High School that Sister Cathy may have been all too aware of. The school, like many institutions at the time, had its share of whispers and rumors, stories of inappropriate behavior by some of the staff, particularly Father Joseph Mascal, the school's chaplain and counselor. Father Mascal was a powerful figure within the school, known for his authoritarian demeanor and his close ties to the Archdiocese of Baltimore. As the years went by, more and more stories began to surface about Father Mascal's abusive behavior towards students. Allegations of sexual abuse, coercion, and psychological manipulation started to emerge, although these were often silenced or dismissed by those in positions of authority. It is within this atmosphere of secrecy and fear that Sister Cathy worked, and there is significant speculation that she may have become aware of what was happening to some of her students. Sister Cathy's caring nature and her commitment to justice would have made it impossible for her to ignore the suffering of her students if she knew what was happening. Some survivors of the abuse have recounted how Sister Cathy had approached them with concern, subtly asking questions that hinted she might have known more than she let on. "Are the priests hurting you? is a question she is reported to have asked some of the girls, revealing her suspicion or knowledge of the abuse taking place. The idea that Sister Cathy was aware of the sinister activities at the school and perhaps even intended to expose them adds a chilling layer to her disappearance and subsequent murder. It is widely believed that her knowledge of the abuse may have put her in grave danger, making her a target for those who wanted to keep these dark secrets hidden. The connection between Sister Cathy's role at Archbishop Keogh High School and her murder has become one of the most compelling aspects of the case. It suggests that her death was not a random act of violence, but rather a calculated move to silence someone who had the potential to bring down powerful figures within the church. The more details that emerged, the clearer it became that Sister Cathy's murder might have been a direct consequence of her proximity to and potential involvement in uncovering the abuses that had plagued the school for years. Father Joseph Mascal, the chaplain and counselor at Archbishop Keogh High School during the 1960s and 1970s, was a man of considerable influence within the Catholic community of Baltimore. However, beneath his outward appearance as a devoted clergyman, Mascal harbored dark secrets that would later emerge to haunt not only his victims but also the broader community that had once trusted him implicitly. Mascal's tenure at Archbishop Keogh was marked by his authoritative presence and his close ties to both the Archdiocese of Baltimore and local law enforcement. As the school's counselor, he had access to the most vulnerable students, those who came to him for guidance and support. Under the guise of spiritual and psychological counseling, Mascal allegedly used his position to manipulate and abuse numerous young girls, exploiting their trust for his own perverse ends. The accusations against Mascal began to surface many years later as survivors of his abuse found the courage to come forward. Former students recounted harrowing stories of sexual assault, psychological torment, and coercion. Mascal was not only accused of personally abusing these girls, but also of facilitating abuse by others, including allowing men outside the school to partake in the exploitation of the students. His actions were not only criminal, but also calculated, as he allegedly used fear, shame, and threats to silence his victims. One of the most chilling aspects of Mascal's reign of terror was his ability to evade justice for so long. His connections within the church and local law enforcement provided him with a protective shield, allowing him to continue his predatory behavior without consequence. When complaints were raised, they were often dismissed or buried, ensuring that Mascal remained untouchable. The link between Mascal and the murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik is one of the most disturbing elements of this case. It is widely believed that Sister Cathy had become aware of Mascal's abuse and was determined to take action. According to some reports, she had confronted Mascal or was planning to report his actions to higher authorities within the church. This knowledge may have sealed her fate. Jean Weiner, one of Mascal's victims, recounted a chilling episode in which Mascal took her to the site where Sister Cathy's body was later found. He allegedly showed her the body and delivered a stark warning. You see what happens when you say bad things about people. This incident, which Weiner shared during the investigation and was featured in the Keeper's documentary, suggests that Mascal was not only aware of Sister Cathy's murder, but may have been directly involved in orchestrating it to protect himself and his dark secrets. Despite the mounting evidence and numerous accusations, Mascal continued to evade legal repercussions during his lifetime. He died in 2001, having never been formally charged for his crimes, leaving a legacy of pain and unanswered questions. His death, however, did not close the case. The shadow he cast over Archbishop Keogh High School and the mystery of Sister Cathy's murder continued to loom large, fueling ongoing investigations and the relentless pursuit of justice by those determined to expose the truth. In the years since Mascal's death, the exhumation of his body for DNA testing and the renewed attention brought by the Keeper's documentary have kept his name at the center of one of Baltimore's most haunting unsolved cases. Though the DNA evidence did not directly link him to Sister Cathy's murder, the circumstantial evidence and the testimonies of survivors paint a damning portrait of a man who wielded his power with devastating consequences. The full extent of Mascal's crimes may never be known, but the impact of his actions continues to be felt by those whose lives he shattered. The abuse scandal at Archbishop Keough High School is a dark chapter in the history of the Catholic Church, one that only began to unravel decades after the fact, thanks to the courage of survivors like Jean Weiner and Teresa Lancaster. These women, who were once students at the school, eventually came forward with harrowing accounts of the abuse they suffered at the hands of Father Joseph Mascal and other priests, exposing a systemic pattern of exploitation, manipulation, and cover up that had been hidden for years. Jean Weiner, who later became known as Jane Doe in a landmark lawsuit against the Archdiocese of Baltimore, was one of the first to speak out about the horrific abuse she endured. Weiner revealed that Father Mascal, who served as the school's chaplain and counselor, systematically abused her and other girls under the guise of offering spiritual guidance and counseling. The abuse was not isolated. It was part of a broader pattern of predatory behavior that involved other priests and men outside the school. Weiner's testimony painted a picture of a man who used his position of power to not only abuse his victims but also to instill fear and silence them. She recounted how Mascal would invoke religious guilt, telling the girls that they would be damned if they spoke out or that their families would suffer. This psychological manipulation was a key component of his control, ensuring that the abuse remained hidden for many years. Teresa Lancaster, another survivor who was referred to as Jane Roe in the same lawsuit, corroborated these accounts, adding further credibility to the allegations against Mascal and the school. Lancaster described similar experiences of abuse, emphasizing how Mascal would exploit his authority to manipulate and terrorize his victims. The true extent of the abuse came to light when these brave women and others decided to confront their pasts and seek justice. Their stories were heartbreaking and consistent, detailing how Maskell not only abused them but also facilitated the abuse by others, sometimes taking the girls to locations outside the school where they were assaulted by other men. This behavior suggested a deeply entrenched network of exploitation, one that extended beyond the walls of Archbishop Keough High School. As the allegations grew, so did the evidence of a systematic cover up by the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Instead of protecting the vulnerable students, the church appeared to have prioritized its reputation and the protection of its clergy. Reports and complaints about Mascal's behavior were allegedly dismissed or ignored, and rather than being held accountable, Mascal was moved to different parishes whenever suspicions arose. The lawsuit filed by Weiner and Lancaster in the 1990s was ultimately dismissed due to the statute of limitations, but it succeeded in bringing the scandal to public attention. The revelations shocked the Baltimore community and sparked widespread outrage. It became clear that the abuse at Archbishop Keough was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of abuse within the Catholic Church, which had been systematically covered up by those in power. In the years following these revelations, the abuse scandal at Archbishop Keough became a focal point in discussions about the broader issue of sexual abuse within the church. The case highlighted the failures of the church to protect its most vulnerable members and the lengths to which it would go to preserve its image, even at the cost of justice for the victims. The impact of the scandal has been profound, leading to increased scrutiny of the church's handling of abuse cases and inspiring other survivors to come forward with their stories. The courage of Jean Weiner, Teresa Lancaster, and others who broke their silence has helped to shine a light on the systemic nature of the abuse and the need for accountability, not just in Baltimore, but within the church as a whole. Their testimonies have ensured that the horrors they endured will not be forgotten and that the fight for justice continues. Jean Weiner's story is one of the most chilling and heart-wrenching elements of the Sister Cathy Cesnik case, revealing the depths of Father Joseph Mascal's depravity and the lengths to which he went to silence those who might expose him. In 1992, more than 2 decades after Sister Cathy's murder, Jean Weiner came forward with an account that would send shockwaves through the community and reignite interest in the unsolved case. Weiner, who had been a student at Archbishop Keogh High School during the time of Sister Cathy's disappearance, recounted a terrifying experience that occurred shortly after the nun went missing. According to her testimony, Father Mascal, who was both her school counselor and abuser, took her to a remote wooded area. As they drove, Weiner had no idea where they were going or what was about to happen, but fear gripped her as Mascal's demeanor grew increasingly ominous. When they arrived at the site, Mascal led her to the gruesome discovery of Sister Cathy Cesnik's lifeless body. Weiner described how the nun's body was lying on the ground, her face covered in dirt, with visible signs of the violence she had endured. This horrifying sight was almost too much for the young Weiner to process, and it was in this moment of horror that Mascal delivered a chilling warning. You see what happens when you say bad things about people. This message was not just a threat, it was a declaration of the power Mascal believed he held over his victims. The implication was clear: anyone who dared to speak out against him or the others involved would meet a similar fate. Mascal's calculated decision to show Wayner's sister Cathy's body was a psychological tactic designed to instill fear and ensure her silence. For years, Waynor kept this traumatic experience buried deep within her. The fear of retribution, compounded by the shame and guilt Mascal had instilled in her, made it impossible for her to come forward. It wasn't until the early 1990s, during therapy sessions, that these repressed memories began to surface, leading her to finally reveal the horrific events she had witnessed. Wayner's account played a pivotal role in bringing attention back to the unsolved murder of Sister Cathy and the broader scandal of abuse at Archbishop Keogh High School. Her testimony was featured prominently in The Keepers, the 2017 Netflix documentary series that explored the case and the widespread cover-up of sexual abuse within the church. Despite the passage of time, the vivid details of her experience and the terror she felt remain powerful reminders of the lengths to which those in power will go to protect their secrets. Wayner's story, corroborated by other survivors and witnesses, has become a cornerstone in the ongoing quest for justice for Sister Cathy. It not only exposed the depths of Mascal's cruelty, but also underscored the systemic nature of the abuse and the institutional failures that allowed it to continue unchecked for so long. The response of the Archdiocese of Baltimore to the allegations surrounding the abuse at Archbishop Keogh High School and the murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik has been a focal point of controversy and outrage. From the moment the allegations began to surface, the Church's actions or lack thereof have been widely scrutinized, leading to accusations that it prioritized protecting its reputation over seeking justice for the victims. In the years immediately following Sister Cathy's murder in 1969, the Archdiocese of Baltimore maintained a stance of limited involvement, largely allowing the local authorities to handle the investigation. However, as the allegations against Father Joseph Mascal began to emerge in the 1990s, it became clear that the Church's response was more about damage control than transparency or accountability. When Jean Weiner and other survivors came forward with their stories of abuse at the hands of Mascal, the Archdiocese's initial reaction was to downplay the severity of the claims. Despite the overwhelming testimonies from multiple victims, the Church appeared more concerned with maintaining its public image. The survivors' lawsuit against the Archdiocese, which sought to hold the Church accountable for its role in covering up the abuse, was met with fierce resistance. The Church's legal team successfully argued for the dismissal of the case on the grounds that the statute of limitations had expired, effectively shutting down one of the few legal avenues available to the victims. The church's handling of the situation was further called into question when it was revealed that complaints about Mascal's behavior had been made as early as the 1960s. Rather than addressing these concerns, the archdiocese allegedly moved Mascal between parishes and schools, a common practice at the time which only served to protect him from scrutiny while allowing the abuse to continue. One of the most damning aspects of the church's response was its alleged involvement in a broader cover up. Survivors and their advocates have long accused the archdiocese of actively obstructing justice by failing to report allegations to the authorities, discouraging victims from coming forward, and even destroying evidence that could have implicated Mascal and others. This pattern of behavior has led many to believe that the church's primary concern was to avoid scandal, even if it meant sacrificing the well-being of countless young women. The revelations brought forth by the Netflix documentary The Keepers in 2017 reignited public outrage and brought the church's actions back into the spotlight. The documentary presented evidence suggesting that the church not only knew about the abuse but also took steps to cover it up, including allegedly paying off victims to keep quiet and threatening those who tried to speak out. Despite these allegations, the Archdiocese has consistently denied any wrongdoing or involvement in a cover up. In recent years, church officials have expressed regret over the handling of the abuse cases and have stated their commitment to supporting victims and preventing future abuse. However, for many, these statements have come too late, and the damage to the church's credibility and moral authority has been profound. The church's response to the abuse scandal and the murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik remains a critical element of the ongoing investigation and public discourse. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the lengths to which institutions may go to protect their own interests at the expense of justice and truth. The murder of Joyce Maly, which occurred just 4 days after the disappearance of Sister Cathy Cesnik, is one of the most haunting parallels in the series of unsolved crimes that rocked Baltimore in the late 1960s. Joyce Maly was a 20-year-old woman who, like Sister Cathy, vanished under mysterious circumstances only to be found dead days later in a remote location. The similarities between the two cases have fueled speculation for decades that they might be connected, possibly linked to the same dark forces that were believed to be at play in Sister Cathy's death. Joyce Maly was last seen on November 11th, 1969, when she went shopping at a mall in Glen Burnie, Maryland. Unlike Sister Cathy, Joyce was not a member of the church, but her sudden disappearance and the subsequent discovery of her body bear eerie similarities to the Cesnik case. 2 days after she went missing, Maly's body was found in a wooded area near Fort Meade, Maryland. She had been strangled and her hands were bound, signs that she had likely been kidnapped and murdered by someone who wanted to ensure her silence. The similarities between the cases are striking. Both women disappeared within the same week, and both were found in remote, wooded areas. Their deaths occurred in close proximity, geographically and temporally, raising questions about whether they were targeted by the same person or persons. Moreover, both cases have remained unsolved, with little to no forensic evidence linking the crimes to a specific perpetrator. One of the most compelling theories connecting the two murders involves Father Joseph Mascal, the priest at Archbishop Keough High School, who has been accused of sexually abusing students. Some investigators and journalists have speculated that Maly, like Sister Cathy, might have known something about the abuse scandal involving Mascal and the church, and that her murder was an attempt to prevent her from coming forward. The locations where the bodies were found add another layer of intrigue to the theory of a connection. Both sites were secluded, making it difficult for passers-by to stumble upon the crime scenes. Mascal's alleged connections to law enforcement and his knowledge of such locations through his work with the National Guard and local police have further fueled suspicions that he could have been involved in both murders. Despite the similarities, the cases have remained officially unconnected. Law enforcement has never definitively linked the two murders, and the lack of conclusive evidence has left many questions unanswered. However, for those who have studied the cases, the timing, methods, and circumstances of the deaths of Sister Cathy Cesnik and Joyce Maly continue to suggest that they may have been victims of the same perpetrators or, at the very least, the same criminal network. The enduring mystery of Joyce Malky's murder, much like that of Sister Cathy, represents a painful chapter in Baltimore's history, one that continues to provoke speculation, investigation, and calls for justice. The parallels between the two cases have become a symbol of the broader issues of abuse, corruption, and cover up that plagued the city during that time, and they serve as a reminder of the many lives impacted by these unresolved crimes. In February 2017, nearly 2 decades after his death, the body of Father Joseph Mascal was exhumed from a Baltimore cemetery, marking a significant moment in the ongoing investigation into the murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik. This exhumation was driven by the relentless pursuit of justice by investigators and survivors who believed that Mascal played a key role in the brutal murder that had haunted Baltimore for nearly 50 years. The purpose of the exhumation was to obtain DNA from Mascal's remains, which could then be compared to forensic evidence found at the crime scene where Sister Cathy's body was discovered. This move was seen as a critical step in either confirming or ruling out Mascal as a suspect in the case. Given the gravity of the accusations against him ranging from sexual abuse of students at Archbishop Keogh High School to potential involvement in the murder, the stakes were high. For many, the exhumation symbolized the hope that modern forensic science could finally bring closure to a case that had been mired in mystery and speculation for decades. If Mascal's DNA matched the evidence from the scene, it would be a powerful, albeit posthumous, indictment of a man who had long been suspected of heinous crimes. However, the results of the DNA comparison were inconclusive. The DNA obtained from Mascal's remains did not match the samples found at the crime scene. This was a blow to those who had hoped that the exhumation would definitively link Mascal to the murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik. Despite the lack of a DNA match, law enforcement officials and many involved in the case were quick to point out that this did not necessarily exonerate Mascal. The absence of a DNA match does not eliminate the possibility that Mascal was involved in Sister Cathy's murder. DNA evidence can degrade over time, and it's possible that other individuals were involved in the crime, leaving DNA evidence that did not belong to Mascal. Moreover, the circumstantial evidence against Mascal remains compelling. His alleged threats, his proximity to the crime, and the testimonies of survivors who claimed he had shown them Sister Cathy's body shortly after her death. The exhumation also reignited public interest in the case, largely due to the ongoing popularity of the Netflix documentary The Keepers, which had brought international attention to the unsolved murder and the associated abuse scandal at Archbishop Keogh High School. The documentary portrayed Mascal as a central figure in the web of abuse and corruption, and the exhumation was seen as a chance to potentially validate the claims made by survivors and investigators. Despite the lack of a definitive link from the DNA results, the exhumation of Father Mascal served as a reminder that the search for truth in Sister Cathy's murder is far from over. It also highlighted the broader issue of accountability within the Catholic Church, as Mascal's alleged crimes were part of a larger pattern of abuse that the Church had been accused of covering up for years. The ongoing suspicion surrounding Mascal is emblematic of the deep wounds that remain unhealed in the Baltimore community. For many, the failure to find a DNA match does not absolve Mascal of guilt. Instead, it reinforces the belief that there are still many unanswered questions and that justice for Sister Cathy and the survivors of abuse remains elusive. The exhumation may not have provided the closure that was hoped for, but it did underscore the enduring determination to uncover the truth, no matter how long it takes. When The Keepers premiered on Netflix in May 2017, it not only captivated audiences worldwide, but also reignited interest in a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 5 decades: the murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik. The seven-part documentary series delved deep into the dark and twisted history of Archbishop Keough High School, uncovering layers of abuse, corruption, and cover-up that had long been buried. The impact of The Keepers was profound, both in terms of public awareness and in the tangible progress it spurred in the investigation. One of the most significant contributions of The Keepers was its ability to bring the stories of survivors like Jean Weiner and Teresa Lancaster into the public eye. These women had bravely come forward years earlier, but their voices had largely been ignored or suppressed. The documentary gave them a platform to share their experiences with a global audience, ensuring that their stories could no longer be dismissed or silenced. This renewed attention also empowered other survivors to come forward with their own accounts of abuse, adding more pieces to the puzzle and helping to build a clearer picture of the systemic problems within the church. The series didn't just stop at recounting the horrific events, it actively contributed to the ongoing investigation. After the release of The Keepers, new tips began to pour in from viewers who had seen the series and believed they had information relevant to the case. This influx of information prompted law enforcement to take a fresh look at the evidence, leading to a resurgence of interest in the investigation and the reopening of several aspects of the case. One of the most striking impacts of The Keepers was its role in highlighting the alleged cover-up by the Archdiocese of Baltimore. The series suggested that the church had gone to great lengths to protect Father Joseph Mascal and other priests involved in the abuse at the expense of justice for the victims. This portrayal resonated with viewers, many of whom were shocked and outraged by the extent of the corruption and the failure of the church to hold those responsible accountable. The documentary also brought national and international attention to the case, leading to greater media coverage and public discourse. As a result, the case of Sister Cathy Cesnik was no longer just a local tragedy. It became a symbol of the broader issues of abuse and corruption within the Catholic Church. The global reach of Netflix meant that The Keepers was seen by millions of people, many of whom were learning about the case for the first time. This widespread exposure not only kept the story alive, but also put pressure on the authorities to continue their pursuit of justice. In the years following the release of The Keepers, there has been a noticeable shift in the narrative surrounding the case. The series helped to transform what had once been seen as a cold case into an ongoing investigation, with new leads and a renewed commitment to finding the truth. While the mystery of Sister Cathy's murder remains unsolved, the impact of The Keepers in bringing renewed attention and urgency to the case cannot be overstated. The documentary's influence extends beyond the specific case of Sister Cathy. It has contributed to a broader conversation about the responsibilities of institutions like the Church in preventing abuse and ensuring accountability. The series has become a touchstone in discussions about how society deals with such grave injustices and the importance of listening to and believing survivors. In essence, The Keepers not only shed light on the dark corners of a long forgotten case, but also inspired a movement, a collective effort by the public, the media, and the justice system to uncover the truth and bring closure to those who have suffered for so long. In the wake of the renewed attention brought by The Keepers, the Baltimore County Police Department made the crucial decision to reopen the investigation into the murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik. This move was a direct response to the flood of new information, tips, and public interest generated by the documentary, which had cast a harsh light on the unresolved questions and potential cover-ups that had plagued the case for nearly 5 decades. The decision to revisit the case was driven by several factors, most notably the testimonies of survivors and witnesses who had come forward with new details after the series aired. The documentary not only reawakened public interest, but also highlighted the gaps in the original investigation, particularly the handling of allegations against Father Joseph Mascal and the Archdiocese of Baltimore. The combination of fresh leads and increased scrutiny made it clear that the case deserved another thorough examination. As part of the reopened investigation, the Baltimore County Police Department focused on re interviewing key witnesses and examining evidence that had previously been overlooked or dismissed. This included taking a closer look at the testimonies of Jean Weiner and other survivors who had provided chilling accounts of abuse and the possible involvement of Mascal in Sister Cathy's murder. Investigators hoped that these testimonies, combined with modern forensic techniques, might yield new insights or leads that could finally bring closure to the case. One of the most significant developments during the reopened investigation was the exhumation of Father Mascal's body in 2017 to obtain DNA samples. Although the DNA did not match evidence found at the crime scene, this step underscored the seriousness with which the police were approaching the case. It also kept Mascal at the center of the investigation, as many believed that the lack of a DNA match did not entirely rule him out as a suspect. The reopened investigation also involved collaboration with other agencies, including the Maryland Attorney General's Office, which had been conducting a broader investigation into sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. This collaboration was crucial in addressing the wider context of abuse and corruption that had been brought to light by the keepers. The combined efforts of these agencies represented a renewed commitment to uncovering the truth, not just about Sister Cathy's murder, but also about the broader abuses that had been covered up for so long. Despite the challenges, the reopening of the investigation has been seen as a critical step toward justice. While no one has yet been charged in connection with Sister Cathy's murder, the ongoing efforts of law enforcement, buoyed by public support and media attention, continue to push the case forward. The decision to reopen the investigation has also been a powerful signal to survivors and the public that the authorities are still committed to seeking justice, no matter how much time has passed. In summary, the reopening of the investigation into Sister Cathy Cesnik's murder has been a complex and painstaking process driven by the new information and heightened awareness brought about by the keepers. While the case remains unsolved, the renewed efforts of the Baltimore County Police Department and other involved agencies have kept hope alive that the truth will eventually come to light and justice will be served. Sister Cathy Cesnik's murder is not just an isolated tragedy. It is deeply intertwined with the broader context of sexual abuse scandals within the Catholic Church. Her case exemplifies how the Church allegedly attempted to suppress damaging information to protect its reputation, even at the cost of justice and the well-being of the vulnerable. The abuse perpetrated by Father Joseph Mascal at Archbishop Keogh High School was part of a larger, systemic problem within the church, where clergy abuse was rampant and often covered up by church authorities. The Catholic Church has faced numerous scandals worldwide where priests and other clergy members were found to have abused their positions of power to exploit children and young adults. In many instances, rather than addressing the crimes, the church chose to protect the abusers, moving them to different parishes, intimidating victims into silence, or outright denying the allegations. Sister Cathy's murder is believed by many to be a direct result of her knowledge of such abuses and her intention to expose them. The reluctance of the church to fully cooperate with the investigation into her death has only fueled suspicions that her murder was part of a broader effort to keep these dark secrets hidden. Unsolved mysteries, lingering questions. Despite the renewed investigation and the public's interest, Sister Cathy Cesnik's murder remains unsolved, leaving many questions unanswered. Chief among these is the most pressing: who killed Sister Cathy and why? Theories abound, with some pointing to Father Mascal as the mastermind behind the murder, possibly orchestrating it to silence her and protect the abusers at Archbishop Keogh High School. Others speculate that more powerful figures within the church or local law enforcement could have been involved, given the extent of the cover up that followed. Was Sister Cathy killed because she knew too much about the abuse, or was her murder the result of something even more sinister involving a network of individuals intent on keeping the church's darkest secrets hidden? These questions continue to haunt the community, and without concrete answers, the mystery surrounding her death persists. The murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik and the subsequent revelations of abuse at Archbishop Keogh High School have left an indelible mark on the Baltimore community. For her former students, many of whom were directly affected by the abuse, the loss of Sister Cathy was not just a personal tragedy, but a symbol of a broader betrayal by an institution they had trusted. The trauma experienced by these women, compounded by the lack of justice, has had lasting effects on their lives and their sense of safety within the community. The broader Baltimore community, too, has been deeply impacted by the case. The trust in local institutions, both religious and legal, has been eroded by the scandal and the persistent failure to bring those responsible to justice. The case has also highlighted the importance of supporting survivors of abuse and ensuring that their voices are heard no matter how much time has passed. Sister Cathy Cesnik's legacy is one of courage, compassion, and a relentless pursuit of truth. Despite the decades that have passed since her murder, the quest for justice continues, driven by the tireless efforts of her former students, advocates, and filmmakers like those behind the keepers. Their work has ensured that Sister Cathy's story remains in the public consciousness and that the fight for accountability within the Catholic Church is far from over. The enduring impact of this case serves as a powerful reminder that the search for truth and justice is a marathon, not a sprint. While Sister Cathy's killers may never be brought to justice, the ongoing efforts to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable ensure that her memory will continue to inspire and motivate those who seek to bring light to the darkest corners of society. The case of Sister Cathy Cesnik is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of never giving up in the face of injustice. As the investigation continues and as more survivors find the courage to come forward, the hope remains that one day the full truth will be revealed and Sister Cathy will finally receive the justice she so richly deserves.